I still remember the crushing weight of that morning as if it were stitched into my skin. The air at Arlington National Cemetery was cold enough to bite. The rows of white headstones made everything feel too perfect, too quiet. My father, Colonel Robert Weston, had worn his medals with quiet pride. Now they rested on a folded flag above his polished coffin. My name is Eric Weston. I am 38 years old. I am a former Marine lieutenant. I never thought I would walk away with nothing but a burning question. As the pallbearers lowered the casket, my older brother, Brandon, stood ramrod straight at the front. He looked every bit the golden son he always was. People clapped him on the shoulder and whispered words of respect. They acted like the entire Weston legacy was already his. The reading of the will happened a few hours later in the study. The room smelled faintly of old leather and my father's expensive cologne. Brandon settled into Dad's oversized leather chair like he already owned it. His posture was impeccable. His wife, polished and calm, sat next to him. I stayed near the door, feeling intensely out of place. The lawyer cleared his throat. His eyes darted between us as he opened the thick envelope. He began to read the formal language, detailing the substantial estate. The atmosphere in the room felt drained of air. To my eldest son, Brandon Weston, I leave the primary residence, the significant stock portfolio, all liquid accounts, and the family trust established 30 years ago. Brandon did not even try to hide his smirk. It spread across his face like a victory flag. To my younger son, Eric Weston, I leave the contents of the military Footlocker stored in the garage, paid in full for 1 year. That was the extent of my share. It was just a single line and a handwritten note scribbled by Dad. Brandon leaned over and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "Guess he left you his junk drawer." I tried to keep my face still, the way 15 years in the Corps had taught me. Something inside cracked. The lawyer slid the folded note across the desk. The scratchy script was instantly recognizable as my father's. It was not a long message, just a few words written unevenly. "Check the Footlocker, son." I gripped the key in my hand until the brass edges left painful dents in my palm. I walked out of that study without a word. The sense of betrayal made it hard to breathe. I knew Brandon had finally won the silent game we never agreed to play. Brandon always wore the uniform like it was specifically tailored for him. He had the straight back, the perpetually polished boots, and the medals pinned with perfect symmetry. He looked like the picture on a recruiting poster. I used to think the military itself had a favorite child. It clearly wasn't me. Brandon got into Annapolis on his first try. I can still see the genuine pride beaming from Dad's face the day that the acceptance letter arrived. I just nodded, muttered my congratulations, and slipped out to the garage. I worked on my old, dented truck until the sun went down. Growing up, the distinction between the two of us was always painfully clear. Brandon was sharp, clean, articulate, and excellent at saying the right things in public. I was the kid who came home with scraped knees and dirt perpetually under his fingernails. I was always trying to fix something broken. I always felt like I was trying too hard to catch up. Dad began calling Brandon officer material before either of us was old enough to shave. I remember overhearing that once during a backyard barbecue. I stood frozen behind the screen door. That night, I hadn't even considered enlisting. After hearing Dad's words, I couldn't think of anything else. When I finally did enlist, I desperately needed to know if I could build something of myself without walking in Brandon's permanent shadow. I deliberately took the hard route. I went through recruit depot, intensive field training, and endless deployments. While I was seeing things no civilian back home could ever comprehend, Brandon stayed polished and pristine. He worked an office job at the Pentagon. He spent his days in classified meetings. I slept under Humvees and ate rations that tasted like sand. I saw combat that changed the composition of my bones. I got shot once in a firefight. It was nothing major, they said, but it was enough to ensure I still set off metal detectors at every airport. Dad visited Brandon's air-conditioned office once and came back boasting about the framed photo he brought for the living room wall. He never once asked about my time overseas. He would simply nod when I mentioned deployments. He treated my service like a chapter he preferred to keep out of the family story. The truth is, I never needed parades or major awards. Some days, it would have meant everything just to hear my father say he was proud of me, not the uniform, but me the man. Brandon never missed a single family event. He was always charming the cousins and discussing high-level politics with the uncles. I missed a few birthdays and a couple of Christmases because I was busy keeping my squad alive in Kandahar. I do not resent him for choosing the easier, safer path. He did what he was naturally good at. However, there is a monumental difference between surviving a war from behind a comfortable desk and surviving it from a dusty, dangerous foxhole. Every Thanksgiving, Dad would predictably toast Brandon's career accomplishments. Every year, I would smile tightly and raise my glass. That is exactly what a son does, even when it truly hurts. So when Brandon inherited everything, I was not entirely surprised. It simply felt like the final, definitive stamp of approval. It was the quiet proof that being the one in the mud never really counted for anything substantial. Maybe, just maybe, that old, rusted Footlocker still had a final word to say. It suggested Dad wasn't quite finished with his life's plan yet. The actual reading of the will had been a blur. The lawyer's words echoed in my head as I drove out to the old storage unit. It sat just on the edge of town. It was tucked behind a sprawling military surplus depot. The whole place smelled overwhelmingly of old oil, dust, and something ancient and forgotten. I found the Footlocker crammed between two units with peeling, illegible numbers. Its lock mechanism clicked open with a distinct sound of resistance. The hinges groaned loudly when I lifted the lid. The chest was the same one I remembered from our damp basement growing up. It was olive green, severely scratched, and deeply dented. My father's name was stenciled in faded black across the front. I stared at the metal surface for a full minute, sensing the weight of time it held. Opening it felt deeply intrusive. The air trapped inside was stale and heavy. On top of the contents lay a stack of his old uniforms. Below them sat his full set of medals in a velvet-lined box. There was also a single-framed photo of Mom holding me as a baby. At first, I mistakenly thought this was it. I thought it was just a collection of memories, a sad, curated farewell gift from a distant father. I ran my hands through the items. Then I noticed the envelope hidden beneath the photo stack. It was yellowed and sealed with a brittle wax stamp I hadn't seen since I was a child. I carefully peeled it open. I pulled out a short letter, typed neatly but signed with his familiar hand. "Eric, if you're reading this, it means I left you nothing visible," the letter began. The text continued, "But you were always the one who saw beyond the rigid orders and the defined objectives. You saw people, son." Beneath the photo stack was a shallow false bottom. I slowly pried it open with a screwdriver. My breath was completely caught in my throat. I found a thick, black binder with the word confidential stamped boldly in red across the cover. Beneath it was a sealed plastic folder labeled Project Legacy. I opened the binder first. The contents were astounding. There were typed pages detailing mission logs and intricately annotated maps of old military bases. One memo immediately caught my eye. It was a copy of my annual fitness report from Kandahar. I never knew how he got it. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note from my father to one of his own contacts. "Keep an eye on my boy's unit. He's a good leader. Make sure this report gets the attention it deserves." I sat back heavily on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit. The heavy weight of the binder in my lap felt strangely comforting. For years, I had believed he saw me as the lesser son. I believed he saw me as the common grunt. Here was the evidence. He hadn't been overlooking me at all. He had been watching me closely, planning something monumental. He was trusting me to carry something far bigger than money. The plastic folder contained something even more remarkable. It held a complete, detailed business plan. It was for a veteran-run logistics company, veteran-run. It prioritized high-risk rural medical supply routes. The final page contained a sticky note with his familiar handwriting. "Your boots have always been on the ground. This is your next mission." For a moment, I truly couldn't breathe. I realized that all those years I thought he was distant, He had been meticulously preparing me for this enormous responsibility. He hadn't left me with anything. He had left me with a life-changing purpose. I just had to be the one to find it. The scale of what I was looking at started to sink in. This wasn't just a hypothetical business plan. The pages detailed bank records, current client names, and fully executed facility layouts. My father hadn't left me a business idea. He had left me a fully functioning, meticulously organized network. He had built it quietly over 15 long years. This whole operation had been constructed while I was overseas in the field. The company name was Honor Shield Logistics. Underneath that deceptively simple name was a truly powerful pipeline for veterans. It was designed for men and women who had returned home feeling lost. My father had systematically created meaningful, real-world roles for them. It wasn't simple charity. It was a profound second chance built exactly like a military unit. He never advertised Honor Shield Logistics. It grew solely through quiet, word-of-mouth recommendations. I found the final transfer documents filed in my name. Ownership shares, trust agreements, and a sealed letter from his lawyer were all set to activate the moment of his death. It hit me like a solid wave. He had been actively grooming me for a specific purpose. The entire complex structure of Honor Shield mirrored exactly what I had learned in the field. I knew intrinsically how to run high-pressure routes. I knew how to lead a team under duress. I knew how to fix critical things when they inevitably broke. I had always thought those specific, hard-won skills were completely useless in civilian life. But he had secretly built something that demanded the exact expertise I possessed. Brandon was intentionally kept out of the loop. This mission was never meant for him. His world was only perfect posture and gleaming polished shoes. Mine was the world that came with permanent calluses. Dad inherently knew exactly which world this urgent mission required. I opened a final sealed envelope marked, "For Eric's eyes only." Inside was the final, direct message. "You've already earned this," it said. "Now lead." My throat tightened with a complicated mix of emotion. After years of feeling silent disapproval, here was my ultimate answer. He had never needed to say the words aloud. He had spent years proving his faith in me through action. My father didn't leave me a routine business. He left me a legacy built entirely on grit, respect, and deep, earned trust. That is the kind of legacy you carry primarily in your boots. The air in the storage unit suddenly felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing my father's elusive approval. He had already given it to me. The final, essential letter from my father wasn't long. Every single word within it was deliberate and precise. My father wrote exactly the way he always lived. He was direct, honest, and with absolutely no wasted space. He explained that he knew if he gave Brandon everything in plain sight, his true character and inability to manage a real operation would surface on its own. He wrote that greed cannot hide for long when it is faced with actual responsibility. Brandon, he explained, needed to fail without any interference to truly understand the value of real leadership. But for me, I needed the complete opposite. I needed time to mature, to hurt from the perceived rejection. Crucially, I needed to learn how to lead effectively without needing constant permission or external validation. He wrote that he saw something core in me that even I couldn't recognize. It was not ambition or a desire for titles. It was deep grit and unwavering loyalty. The mission was explicitly clear. Honor Shield was mine to command. I was to take the powerful network he had meticulously built and expand it. I was to reach into every necessary corner of the country. I was to help every veteran who came home feeling like they had nothing left. The Footlocker contained key documentation proving that the sprawling Honor Shield Logistics was the true core of the family's wealth. This was specifically because it owned all the vital physical assets. The house, the stocks, and the initial business Brandon inherited were essentially a financial shell. They were completely worthless without control of the actual warehouses and the fleet of specialized transport trucks. Brandon had inherited the name and the debt. I had inherited the backbone. My father wrote that the work would be relentlessly hard. There would be days I would desperately want to walk away, but he finished by saying that I would not. I intrinsically understood the deep, profound weight of real duty. He wrote that the whole mission was never just about business or profit. It was about meticulously restoring dignity and giving back a sense of purpose to the people who had given everything to their country. He ended the letter with something incredibly simple, yet completely transformative. "You've always led from the mud. Now lead from the front." I read those words repeatedly, allowing them to truly sink deep into my consciousness. This was absolutely not about Brandon. It was not about simple revenge. It was purely about establishing a lasting legacy. I folded the letter carefully. I placed it back into the envelope. I looked toward the morning horizon. The sun was just starting to climb over the distant hills. For the first time in years, I felt a solid sense of purpose. I was not just ready to lead. I was finally ready to serve again, but this time, it would be entirely on my own terms. In just a few short months, everything Brandon had inherited began to rapidly slip through his grasping fingers. The impressive stock portfolio, the seemingly large liquid accounts, even the fancy corporate office my father had used, none of it could hold together. It failed without control of the essential logistics infrastructure. Brandon had the legal shell of the company. All of his major clients, mostly government-adjacent services, relied entirely on the specific warehouses and secure transport routes now owned by Honor Shield Logistics. Clients began quietly pulling out, then almost all at once. Brandon failed to execute basic supply deliveries. He could not access the critical facilities we now controlled. Vendors quickly stopped answering his frantic calls. The financial system surrounding the shell company began its inevitable, cascading collapse. Rumors quickly swirled about missed payments and broken vendor promises. They spoke of a leader who clearly did not know the first thing about efficiently managing an operation. Meanwhile, we at Honor Shield got straight to the crucial work. We didn't have the luxurious offices Brandon had. We had a rock-solid, deeply shared sense of purpose. Veterans began showing up every single week. They came not just because of the job openings, but because they felt a powerful sense of community. We successfully placed well over 200 former service members into stable, meaningful roles by the end of the first year alone. These included essential truck drivers, highly organized logistics team members, and former field medics. The media occasionally picked up our moving story. Far more important than any fleeting headline were the daily phone calls we received. Mothers, wives, and old unit buddies all thanked us. They thanked us for giving their sons and husbands something truly positive to believe in again. Brandon's name slowly and quietly faded from the local business papers. The people who are never chasing the spotlight for the right reasons eventually disappear into the dark. What my father had so patiently built was never truly about personal wealth. It was fundamentally about how you genuinely treat people when absolutely no one is watching. Brandon never learned that crucial lesson. I had to live it every single day of my military life. Now I found myself teaching that same hard-won lesson every time I spoke to a new team member. Brandon showed up on a cold, brisk Tuesday morning. He was looking completely defeated. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of a jacket that was clearly too big for him. He was not wearing his sharp, impressive suit. He wore a pair of worn jeans. He looked like a man who had lost everything meaningful. For the very first time in my life, he looked exactly like someone who desperately needed help. He quietly asked if there was any kind of work he could do. He wasn't asking for a fancy position or a specific title. He just asked for work, any work at all. I immediately thought back to the section of my father's letter that was written specifically for this day. I could clearly hear his steady, calm voice in my head saying, "Give him the bottom, let him earn the climb." So, I offered Brandon a job in the company's intake office. He would log and process the flood of job requests that came in daily from veterans across the entire country. It was absolutely not a glamorous job. It was incredibly vital and meaningful work. He took it instantly. He offered no complaints and no excuses. He just gave a quiet nod and displayed a profound humility. Over the next few weeks, a very subtle shift began to take place in him. He started showing up early. He often stayed late without being asked. He began genuinely asking about the veterans he used to haughtily ignore. He learned their names. He listened to their often difficult stories. He started treating them with the respect he had never shown before. I watched him from a distance. I was not judging his past actions. I was simply hoping that the hard lessons would stick. Some profound lessons can only be taught by the harsh realities of time and severe personal loss. One night, I was locking up the old, dusty storage room that we had converted into a records office. That same original Footlocker from the garage sat quietly in the far corner. It was dusty now. I still couldn't bring myself to move it or throw it away. I lifted the lid one last time, just for myself. The essential letter was still inside, folded neatly with my name on the front. I read it once more. This time, the very last line hit me with a completely new and deeper meaning. "You were never a failure. You were the mission," it said. I gently closed the lid. I stood there in the profound quiet. It was the kind of satisfying quiet that settles deep in your chest. It makes you truly feel the complete weight of every single step that led you to this moment. Legacy is absolutely not what you take with you when you leave this world. It is, instead, what you meticulously build and leave behind for others. It is constructed one life at a time, one helping hand extended. It is one genuine second chance freely given. It is, perhaps, one lost brother finally forgiven. The uniform itself didn't make the leader. The people and the willingness to serve them did. My father hadn't simply given me an inheritance. He had given me a lasting legacy.